David, this administration had walked away from Iran nuclear deal and imposing sanctions right now, and they are talking about the possibility of negotiation. Isn't it confusing situation?
Well, I'm not sure it is. That the premise has always been that you have to create leverage before you negotiate. That was the Obama administration's premise as well, and they often said that one of their big accomplishments, they put on strong enough sanctions from 2009 through 2012 to be able to initiate discussions that were productive in getting Iran to sign the JCPOA, as the Iran nuclear deal is formally known. And of course, this administration is extending that principle. It says the JCPOA was not enough. It did nothing to deal with Iran's activity in the region, its evasion of Syria sanctions, its support for Houthi rebels. In Yemen, its support for Assad, its attacks on Israel. So what they're looking to do now is simply take that pressure to a new level that Iran hasn't experienced before. And there's no question that at this point its economy is experiencing a downturn, recession, inflation, and a currency collapse like it hasn't had to confront.
And as you know, the nature of these regimes, always, they find a way to survive these kind of things. It seems like Iran right now is not answering these pressures, as if they are not feeling this pressure. They are enriching uranium. They are continuing influencing the area, playing games with the United States of America, allies in the region, as if they are applying a pressure or a pressure from their own. It seems like pressure here and pressure there, and there is no way out. So how do you think that this policy or this leverage you are talking about, the sanctions and others, could work?
Well, I'm not sure that the Iranian leadership is as confident or complacent as some suggest. The thing that, of course, they fear above all is their own population, and that's why they need to repress them so mercilessly. Now, the biggest outbreak of protests at home was toward the end of 2017, although it's continued in quite a number of forms, even if the numbers on the street haven't been the same. And I would suggest that, in fact, the recent attacks in the Gulf and other things that they have done, shooting down the American drone, apparently authorizing attacks on a pipeline, using their militia in Iraq, those are partial responses to the frustration they're feeling. Now, it's important to remember Iran doesn't back down and stop attacking even when things are going well. It's always looking to push as far as it can to see what the West will tolerate. It's important to remember that the EU actually put the first new terrorism sanctions on Iran not that long ago for attempted bombings in Denmark and France, as well as assassinations in the Netherlands. And that was at a time, of course, when the EU was sort of Iran's greatest partner in trying to preserve the JCPOA. So now Iran, with its economy really under siege in an unprecedented way, is doing the provocative things that raise the temperature. And I think it's precisely because its goal is to make people afraid, especially in Europe, and of course the opposition in the United States, so that they put pressure on the administration to come to the table with weaker conditions. Iran, as it often has, is trying to use attacks and terrorism to set the table for negotiations that favor its approach.
So do you think this economic pressure in the end it's going to have Iran coming back to the table, negotiate with this administration and come up with a deal with this administration?
Well, I don't want to pretend I have a crystal ball that no one else does. We can certainly look back to the precedent of the Obama years when, even though the sanctions had not been in place at full strength for very long, the Iranians were already ready to negotiate the restraints that ultimately became part of the JCPOA, even if they were insufficient. I think if we see the restraints go to a new level, and if we see this administration having the patience not to rush for a deal that it can celebrate as a victory on its own part, it can really cause a lot more frustration and a lot more flexibility. That, Iran, it's really only when it's in dire straits, when the regime really fears that it's at the edge of its own people rising up, like at the end of its war with Iraq in the 1980s, that's when it comes and it's willing to make big compromises.
So it seems the administration, the only leverage they have is the policy of maximum pressure. Do you think it's going to work?
I think there's a reasonable chance it will. I think it's not, maximum pressure has multiple fronts. It has the military front. It's important to have a credible deterrent in the Gulf, and new measures are being undertaken to organize security for ships. Of course, there's the economic component. There's a diplomatic component as well. I think it would be best if at this point, after Iran has now committed very deliberately and in a premeditated manner a breach of the enrichment limits on uranium, I think it really is incumbent upon the UK and upon the other parties to the deal to say Iran has backed away from it. They've made it clear, and the old sanctions should go back in place from the UN, and I think that would strengthen them in a useful manner, even though unilateral sanctions have proven quite effective. So I'm comfortable with that approach.
Let us talk about the previous deal and if that will ever, come with this administration. The previous deal was negotiated by the United States of America, but with the huge backing of the European allies, and they work as a facilitator. It seems like this administration right now, they are trying their own. Don't you think that is make it this new situation? Especially they walked out of the deal, and there is a lot of anger there in Europe because of that move. Don't you think that now they are in a very difficult situation than it used to be during the Obama administration?
There's a challenge. It's important to remember that it really always was an American spearheaded initiative, even under Obama. I mean, it was really our Secretary of State, John Kerry, there, fashioning the essential terms for the not Iran side of the equation, and others went along with it and often felt they had to. That there are advantages to having others, that after the revelations about Iran's secret uranium enrichment facilities, you could see that's why even Russia and China were willing to get on board, but it remained mainly a U.S. initiative. What I would hope is now that Iran is again really flagrantly and in a premeditated manner breaching the deal, the other parties to the P5+1 will come around and see what they should do is line up as part of an effort to get a better deal. I mean, the French and even others had raised doubts about the quality of that deal in the first place that was rushed through in part because Obama's second term was ending. Hopefully now we'll have a little more patience and we can get back to a place where there's a united front against Iran.
But Iran said we breached the deal because the United States of America has breached the deals, by walking away and
of course
sanction on us. And this will get me back again to this deal, this attempt by the United States of America trying to negotiate. I'm saying here with having this condition without having that strong backing from the European Union or allies. Do you think that this administration will have an easy right to do it?
No, I think there are challenges there, and then there are much broader ways in which this administration has antagonized Europe over issues related to NATO and trade as well. And certainly I and some of my colleagues at the Foundation have been calling for a more constructive approach to Europe. But I don't think the issue is that the U.S. backed out of the deal. Remember, the deal never had signatures on it. It was never approved by the U.S. Congress. And there's nothing that really would prevent the Trump administration. When Iran signed it, both the Obama administration and Iran understood it would last only as long as that administration or another Democratic administration was in power. That's the risk you take when you don't have a deal that can get majority and supermajority support in the Senate. So, it's better to have the sort of the whole team playing together. And now that Iran has done what it's done, even if it's in response to the U.S. pulling out, the fact is that Europe should then do what it is supposed to do, which is if Iran pulls away, it uses the snapback sanction so that the UN moves to restore all of the resolutions that put mandatory sanctions in place on Iran before. That would add pressure.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you for this.
My pleasure. I always like to talk about this.
Thank you so much.